Hello and welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. As you settle in for the night, prepare to be immersed in a world of eerie whispers and unsettling tales, designed to both chill and soothe. Now close your eyes, relax, and let the darkness carry you away. And if these nightly tales captivate you, feel free to join our community for more whispered secrets. The city of Bergen, Norway, had always been known for its picturesque scenery, charming streets, and quiet way of life. Nestled between fjords and mountains, it was the kind of place where people felt safe, where danger felt like something that only existed in distant headlines. That all changed in November 2018, when a young woman named Elin Haugen vanished without a trace. Elin was a 27-year-old graduate student at the University of Bergen, studying marine biology. Described by friends and family as intelligent, kind, and fiercely independent, she was someone who rarely made enemies. She lived alone in a modest apartment near the city center, close to the university and the harbor, where she often spent time working on research projects. On the evening of November 12, 2018, Elin was last seen leaving a local cafe near Bryggen, a historic district lined with colorful wooden houses. Surveillance footage showed her walking alone, dressed in a thick navy blue coat and a gray scarf. She appeared to be in no rush, her hands tucked into her pockets against the cold. She had sent a final text message to her best friend, Ingrid Lund, at 8:47 p.m. saying, "Heading home now. See you tomorrow." It was the last time anyone heard from her. The next morning, when Elin failed to show up for an early lecture she was supposed to assist with, her professor grew concerned. Calls to her phone went straight to voicemail, and messages remained unread. By midday, Ingrid went to Ellen's apartment, only to find the door locked. Her car was parked outside, untouched. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication that anything was wrong. But Ellen was gone. By that evening, the police were contacted, and an official missing persons case was opened. Investigators quickly pulled surveillance footage from the area surrounding the cafe, confirming that Ellen had indeed left alone. But the footage ended abruptly just 2 blocks away, near a dimly lit intersection where security cameras were sparse. Beyond that point, she simply disappeared. Authorities conducted a widespread search, focusing on nearby waterways, wooded areas, and the university campus. Helicopters, search dogs, and volunteers combed through every possible lead. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, with no sign of Elin Haugen. The case grew more perplexing when investigators began piecing together the final days leading up to her disappearance. Friends mentioned that Ellen had been unusually distracted, even anxious, though she had brushed it off as stress over an upcoming research presentation. Her phone records showed several calls to an unknown number the week before she vanished, calls that lasted only seconds before abruptly disconnecting. When police traced the number, they found that it was registered under a false name. Then came the most chilling clue of all. 3 weeks after Ellen disappeared, her bank card was used at a small gas station nearly 120 kilometers away, in a remote town near the Swedish border. The security footage from the station showed a hooded figure approaching the ATM, withdrawing cash, then walking away quickly. The person never looked directly at the camera, and the footage was too grainy to determine if it was Ellen or someone else using her card. Had Ellen left voluntarily? Was she taken against her will? If so, why had there been no ransom demands, no evidence of struggle? And who had she been trying to reach in the days before she vanished? As the years passed, the case of Elin Haugen remained one of Norway's most haunting disappearances. With no suspects, no motive, and no body, the questions only deepened. This is the story of what happened, or perhaps what didn't happen, the night Elin Haugen disappeared, and the mystery that continues to haunt those who knew her. The first 48 hours following Elin Haugen's disappearance were critical. Investigators worked around the clock, retracing her steps from the moment she left the cafe in Bryggen to the last known footage of her near the dimly lit intersection. But despite their best efforts, no solid leads emerged. Ellen's family, devastated by the uncertainty, pleaded with the public for information. Her parents, Henrik and Lars Haugen, appeared on national television, their voices trembling as they described their daughter. "She wouldn't just disappear," Henrik said firmly. "Something happened to her. Someone out there knows something." Detectives interviewed everyone in Ellen's life, Her friends, colleagues, neighbors, even her ex-boyfriend Marcus, who had recently moved to Oslo. He was cooperative, providing an alibi that checked out. He hadn't spoken to Elin in over a month and seemed genuinely shocked by her disappearance. What puzzled investigators most was the absence of any evidence of struggle. If Elin had been abducted, why was there no sign of it? No witnesses had reported hearing a scream. No one had seen her being followed. It was as if she had simply stepped off the face of the earth. Then, a break in the case came in the form of a taxi driver. 2 days after Elin vanished, a man named Lars Henriksen came forward, claiming he had picked up a young woman matching Elin's description late that night near the intersection where she was last seen. According to Henriksen, she seemed nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder. When he asked where she wanted to go, she hesitated before finally saying, "Just drive for a while." He described her as fidgeting with her phone, but when he glanced in the rearview mirror, she had turned it off. Eventually, she asked to be dropped off near a quiet residential area on the outskirts of Bergen. When Henriksen asked if she was meeting someone, she simply said, "It's fine. Thank you," and left. The lead was promising, but once again it led to a dead end. The area where she had been dropped off had no surveillance cameras, no witnesses who recalled seeing her, and no additional clues. Police searched nearby streets, checked abandoned buildings, and went door to door asking questions. But Elin was gone. Meanwhile, her phone records were analyzed further. Investigators found something unusual. 3 calls made the evening before she disappeared, all to the same unregistered number. The calls lasted only seconds before disconnecting. When authorities attempted to trace the number, they found it was linked to a prepaid SIM card purchased at a convenience store 2 weeks earlier. The buyer had used cash. No identification. No surveillance footage of the purchase. As the case gained more media attention, theories began to swirl. Some believed Elin had discovered something she wasn't supposed to, perhaps related to her marine biology research. Others speculated she had been involved in a secret relationship, one she was trying to hide. A more chilling theory suggested that she had been stalked by an unknown person, someone who had been watching her movements for weeks before finally making their move. Despite the overwhelming sense of urgency, days turned into weeks, and then months. The search parties grew smaller, and leads became colder. The police remained dedicated, but with no concrete evidence, the case was slipping further into mystery. Then came another strange development. 5 months after Elin's disappearance, a hiker in the remote forests outside of Flam, nearly 170 kilometers from Bergen, stumbled upon something odd. A single black leather glove, half buried in the dirt. It was damp, partially decayed, but clearly out of place. The hiker, having seen the news coverage of Elin's case, immediately contacted authorities. When police arrived, they scoured the surrounding area. No body, no phone, just the glove. A forensic analysis later confirmed that it contained Elin Haugen's DNA. What was her glove doing in a remote area so far from home? Had she traveled there willingly? Had someone taken her there? And if so, where was she now? As detectives struggled to answer these questions, one thing became clear. Elin's disappearance wasn't just a case of someone getting lost. Something much more sinister had happened, and the mystery was only deepening. The discovery of Elin Haugen's glove in the remote forests outside of Flam reignited the investigation. For months, the case had been at a standstill, with only fragments of leads that seemed to go nowhere. Now, for the first time in nearly half a year, there was something tangible, something that placed Elin far from her home in Bergen. But the question remained, how did it get there? Forensic teams combed through the dense woodland area where the glove had been found, searching for any sign of human activity. They used drones, cadaver dogs, and infrared scanning to check for disturbed ground, but nothing else of significance surfaced. No clothing, no personal belongings, no signs of struggle. The Norwegian police expanded their search radius, questioning hikers, locals, and anyone who might have been in the area around the time of Elin's disappearance. A few people recalled seeing a dark-colored sedan parked along the roadside a few days after she vanished, but the details were vague. No license plate, no identifying features, just a car sitting in the fog, its driver unseen. Meanwhile, detectives revisited the strange phone calls Elin had made before she disappeared. They reached out to telecommunications experts to analyze the call records again, hoping to uncover something they had missed. This time they found something. The calls had pinged off a cell tower near Voss, nearly an hour outside of Bergen and close to the direction of Flam. Had Elin gone there willingly? Had she been lured? And why had the number she dialed been deactivated almost immediately after her disappearance? The media frenzy surrounding the case reached new heights as the discovery of the glove made headlines across Norway. Theories began to flood in. Some suggested Elin had been abducted by someone she knew. Others believed she had stumbled upon something dangerous in her research. But one theory in particular began to gain traction: the presence of an unidentified person who had been watching her. Ingrid Lund, Elin's best friend, came forward with a troubling detail she hadn't previously shared. A few weeks before Elin vanished, she had confided in Ingrid about a feeling she couldn't shake, the sense that she was being followed. She had dismissed it at the time, thinking it was just paranoia from long study nights and stress, but now Ingrid wasn't so sure. Investigators pored over surveillance footage from the university, Elin's apartment, and nearby public transport hubs. Then they saw it, in footage taken from a tram station near Elin's apartment just a week before she disappeared. A man dressed in dark clothing could be seen standing near the entrance, watching as Elin boarded. He didn't get on the tram, nor did he approach her. He simply stood there, unmoving, his hands tucked into his pockets. The same man appeared in footage from a cafe Elin had visited 2 days before she vanished. He was in the background, sitting at a table near the window, seemingly reading a newspaper. But when zoomed in, his eyes were on Elin. This wasn't a coincidence. This was stalking. Detectives worked tirelessly to identify the man, running the footage through facial recognition software. But nothing came up. He had no criminal record, no known aliases, and no one seemed to recognize him. It was as if he had no history, just a shadow lurking in the background of Elin's final days. As investigators continued to dig, another strange discovery was made. A second glove. It was found deep in the undergrowth, nearly 50 meters away from the first. Unlike the first, this one was slightly torn, as if it had been caught on something. DNA testing confirmed it belonged to Elin. But the most unsettling part? There were faint traces of someone else's DNA on the inside of the glove. Whoever had been with Elin that night had left a mark. And for the first time, investigators had evidence that this wasn't just a case of a missing person. It was a crime. With renewed determination, the investigation pressed forward. But the deeper they dug, the more questions arose. Where had Elin gone that night? Who was the man in the footage? And if he had been watching her, why hadn't he come forward? The search for answers was only just beginning. As the case of Elin Haugen deepened, so did the unease within the small community of Bergen. The discovery of her second glove in the remote woodlands near Flam added another layer of complexity, leaving more questions than answers. Who had been with her that night? And what had truly happened in the hours following her last confirmed sighting? With the newly discovered DNA evidence on the second glove, forensic teams intensified their efforts, running the sample through national and international databases. But the results came back inconclusive, no match. Whoever had been with Elin was not in any criminal records, at least not under any known identity. Investigators turned their focus to the mysterious man caught in surveillance footage. They pored over every frame, trying to extract any identifiable feature. The problem was he had been careful, his face partially obscured, his clothing nondescript. Still, the consistency of his appearances near Elin in the days leading up to her disappearance suggested more than coincidence. This was planned. In an effort to find out more, the police revisited Elin's friends, colleagues, and even distant acquaintances, asking if anyone had ever seen the man before. One person, a classmate named Martin, hesitantly came forward with a troubling story. Elin told me something weird about 2 weeks before she went missing, he admitted. She said she thought she saw someone outside her apartment building a few nights in a row, just standing there. Martin hadn't thought much of it at the time, assuming it was a nosy neighbor or someone waiting for a ride. But now he realized there had been something deeper in Elin's unease. She hadn't been simply paranoid, she had been watched. Investigators immediately retrieved surveillance footage from near Elin's apartment for the nights leading up to her disappearance. Hours of grainy footage revealed disturbing confirmation. a shadowy figure standing across the street, just beyond the reach of a street lamp. He never moved toward the building, never approached her directly, but he was there night after night, always watching. The deeper the investigation went, the clearer it became that Elin's disappearance wasn't random. She had been targeted. Meanwhile, detectives continued to follow the financial lead from her bank card's use at the gas station nearly 120 kilometers away. They scoured transaction records and security footage, but once again hit a wall. The footage was too blurry, the angle too poor to make out the person withdrawing money. Whoever it was, they had known how to avoid detection. Then, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired fisherman named Lars Henriksen, who lived near the forests of Flam, reported something peculiar. A few days after Elin's disappearance, he had spotted a car parked in an unusual location along the road leading into the forest. "It was strange," Henriksen said when questioned. "Most people don't park there. It's too remote, not near any hiking trails. But this car just sat there for hours. Then one morning it was gone." When asked to describe the car, he could only recall that it was dark-colored, possibly navy or black, and that it had foreign plates that weren't from Norway. This revelation sent investigators scrambling to check records of foreign vehicles entering Norway around the time of Elin's disappearance. While cross-referencing incoming and outgoing vehicles, they found something intriguing. A dark blue sedan registered to a man from Sweden had entered Norway 2 days before Elin disappeared and left the country 4 days later. The car's owner, Anton Dahlgren, was a Swedish national with no known connection to Elin. He had no criminal record, no previous involvement in missing persons cases. But when Norwegian authorities reached out to their Swedish counterparts for more information, they were met with an alarming discovery. Dahlgren had also disappeared. His car had returned to Sweden, but he hadn't been seen since. His phone was deactivated, his apartment untouched. It was as if he had simply vanished, just like Elin. Had Dahlgren been involved in Elin's disappearance? Or was he another victim, caught in a web of something much larger? With 2 missing persons and an ever-growing mystery, investigators realized they were no longer dealing with a simple case. This was something far more sinister. The discovery of Anton Dahlgren's disappearance sent shockwaves through the investigation. Until now, detectives had been focused solely on finding Elin Haugen, but now they faced an even deeper mystery. Was Dahlgren connected to Elin, or was he another victim in a larger, more sinister plot? Interpol was brought into the case, expanding the search beyond Norway and Sweden. They began tracking any movements associated with Dahlgren before his disappearance. What they found only deepened the mystery. A trail of unexplained travel. Dahlgren had been moving frequently in the months leading up to Elin's disappearance. Records showed that he had traveled to Germany, Denmark, and even as far as the Czech Republic, often staying for only a few days before moving on. But there was one common thread in all of his movements. Each location he visited had reported missing persons cases around the same time. This realization sent a chill through investigators. Was Dahlgren a predator? Or had he stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to? Meanwhile, back in Norway, forensic teams combed through every aspect of Elin's life again. This time, they examined her research notes, trying to determine if she had uncovered something that might have put her in danger. One of her professors, Dr. Sivertsen, noted something strange. In the weeks before she vanished, Elin had become obsessed with a specific environmental study. She had been researching chemical contaminants in the North Sea, investigating possible illegal dumping by an unknown organization. Some of her notes were missing, as if someone had taken them, or she had hidden them. The theory took an even darker turn when police contacted a former researcher who had worked on a similar project a few years earlier. His name was Eric Brandt, and he had abruptly quit academia after what he called a threatening experience. When investigators asked him for details, he hesitated before finally revealing his story. "I was warned to stop looking into it," he said. "People started showing up near my house. Watching. Following. I got a letter saying that if I didn't abandon my research, I'd disappear. So I left. Could Elin have received the same warning? If so, why hadn't she told anyone? And why did it seem like Dahlgren had been following the same pattern?" The deeper investigators went, the more tangled the web became. Someone or some organization had been watching people who got too close to whatever secret Elin had uncovered. And now 2 people were missing. Then came another break. A hiker near the Swedish border reported something unusual: a burned-out vehicle in an abandoned clearing. When police arrived, they found what remained of a dark blue sedan, its license plate missing. But the VIN number, once recovered, confirmed it. It was Dahlgren's car. The interior was scorched, but forensic teams found something chilling: traces of blood on the driver's seat. DNA tests were ordered immediately. The results came back within days. The blood belonged to Anton Dahlgren. But there was another, smaller sample of blood found on the seatbelt. It belonged to Elin Haugen. The revelation sent the investigation into overdrive. The presence of both their blood in the same vehicle indicated they had been together at some point. But in what capacity? Had they been working together? Had one kidnapped the other? Or had they both been taken by someone else entirely? And if Dahlgren had been killed, where was his body? The case was no longer just a missing persons investigation. It was now something far more ominous. As authorities braced for their next move, one terrifying possibility loomed over them. Were Elin and Dahlgren the only ones? Or was this just the tip of the iceberg? The discovery of the burned-out vehicle and the blood traces belonging to both Elin Haugen and Anton Dahlgren shifted the investigation into high gear. The evidence suggested violence, but there were no bodies, no clear timeline, and no witnesses. What had happened to them? Forensic teams meticulously examined the remnants of the car, searching for anything that might reveal what had transpired. Among the ash and debris, they found something crucial: a partially melted flash drive tucked inside what was once the glove compartment. Though damaged, investigators hoped that some data could be salvaged. Back at the forensic lab, digital analysts worked tirelessly to recover information from the device. After hours of reconstruction, they retrieved 3 partially corrupted files. Each contained encrypted data, but fragments of text were visible. One of the readable excerpts sent chills down the spine of everyone in the room. "They know we found it. We can't stay here. Going dark for now." Who had written this message? Was it Elin? Dahlgren? And what had they found that warranted such urgency? Investigators theorized that the duo had been uncovering something significant, possibly connected to Ellin's environmental research. But why had Dahlgren, a seemingly unrelated Swedish national, been caught in the same net? As detectives worked to unravel the mystery, a new lead emerged. A former security contractor named Henrik Haugen came forward with information that turned the case on its head. Haugen had worked for a private intelligence firm with contracts across Northern Europe. When he saw reports about Ellin's case on the news, he recognized Dahlgren's name. He wasn't just some random guy, Haugen revealed. Dahlgren worked in covert investigations. He specialized in corporate espionage and whistleblower extractions. If he was involved with Elin, it means she was in serious danger. This revelation painted a terrifying picture. Had Dahlgren been helping Elin escape from something? Or had he been sent to stop her? Determined to find answers, detectives revisited Ellin's university colleagues, questioning them about her research in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. One particular name kept surfacing: a corporate entity known as Nordic Petrochem. The multinational firm had been flagged for environmental violations in the past, accused of illegal dumping in Scandinavian waters. Elin had been investigating chemical contamination in marine life. Was her research exposing something that Nordic Petrochem wanted to keep hidden? Then, another bombshell. Investigators traced the deactivated burner phone Elin had repeatedly called before her disappearance. While they still couldn't identify the user, they found that the phone had last connected to a cell tower just 2 kilometers from Nordic Petrochem's Norwegian headquarters. The pieces were beginning to fit, but the bigger picture remained elusive. What had Elin discovered that was worth killing for? As the pressure mounted, the case took yet another twist. A local fisherman near the border of Norway and Sweden reported an eerie encounter, one that occurred 3 days after Elin and Dahlgren vanished. He had been sailing near a desolate fjord when he spotted a woman standing alone on the rocky shoreline. She was wearing a coat but appeared disoriented, staring out at the water. When he called out to her, she abruptly turned and disappeared into the trees. The fisherman had initially dismissed the sighting as a lost hiker, but after seeing Ellin's face on the news, he became convinced that it was her. Was Elin still alive? Had she managed to escape something terrifying? Or had she been running from a threat far greater than anyone had imagined? The search intensified, with authorities combing the fjord and the surrounding wilderness. Helicopters, tracking dogs, and volunteer search teams scoured every inch of the area. But once again, Elin had disappeared into the unknown. As the investigation continued, one thing became painfully clear. Elin Haugen's story was far from over, and whoever had orchestrated her disappearance was still out there, watching. The revelation that Anton Dahlgren was not just a Swedish national, but a covert investigator sent shockwaves through the investigation. If he had been in contact with Elin Haugen before her disappearance, the nature of their relationship had to be reconsidered. Was he helping her escape, or was he part of the threat? As detectives scoured through Dahlgren's background, they discovered that he had worked on cases involving corporate cover-ups, specifically whistleblower extractions. His disappearance in tandem with Elin's strongly suggested that both of them had been in danger. Investigators refocused their attention on Nordic Petrochem, the corporation Elin had been researching before she vanished. Their environmental violations had long been a source of controversy, but this case was revealing a far darker truth. Nordic Petrochem's history showed a disturbing pattern. Several journalists and environmental researchers who had investigated the company in the past had met with accidents, sudden resignations, or had simply disappeared from public life. The Norwegian authorities intensified their probe into the company. They subpoenaed internal documents and employee records, looking for any connection to Elin. One name emerged, a security consultant named Jonas Ryberg. Ryberg had been employed by Nordic Petrochem for the past 5 years, working in risk mitigation, a vague title often associated with handling sensitive company matters. Detectives traced Ryberg's recent movements. His credit card transactions placed him in Bergen the night Elin disappeared. Even more alarming, security footage from a toll booth outside of town showed his vehicle heading toward the forested area near Flam the same night Dahlgren's car was found burned. Ryberg was brought in for questioning. The seasoned corporate fixer sat stone-faced across the interrogation table, refusing to answer questions without legal representation. But his silence only fueled investigators' suspicions. They obtained a warrant for his phone records, uncovering encrypted messages sent to an unidentified number the night of Elin's disappearance. The texts were chilling. "It's done. No loose ends." A few minutes later, another message. "The package is handled. Leaving tonight." The texts alone weren't enough to convict Ryberg, but they pointed toward a coordinated operation, one that suggested Elin had been silenced. Meanwhile, the search in the fjord continued after the fisherman's sighting. Tracking dogs picked up a faint scent near a cluster of abandoned cabins deep in the forest. The cabins, once used by hunters, had fallen into decay, long since forgotten. Inside one of them, search teams found a torn piece of fabric matching the lining of Elin's coat. The implications were clear. Elin had been there. Forensic teams swept the cabin for evidence. They found fingerprints, Elin's, as well as a few unidentified ones. But the most disturbing find was a small, bloodied bandage tucked under the wooden floorboards. The blood was confirmed to belong to Elin Haugen. Had she been injured? Had she been hiding? Or had she been kept there against her will? Investigators needed answers fast, and they were running out of time. Then, a game-changing piece of evidence surfaced. One of the forensic analysts working on Dahlgren's burned-out car managed to recover a single dashcam file from what was left of the vehicle. The footage was grainy, distorted by heat damage, but what it captured was terrifying. The video, time-stamped the night Elin vanished, showed a dark road winding through the Norwegian countryside. The headlights illuminated the thick forest as the car moved forward. Then, in the distance, figures standing in the middle of the road. Dahlgren's voice could be heard in the background, urgent and nervous. "This isn't good. This isn't good." Then a loud bang. The car swerved violently. The screen cut to static. The last known moments of Anton Dahlgren and Elin Haugen had been captured. But where had they gone after the footage ended? And who were the figures standing in the road that night? For investigators, the pieces were falling into place. Elin's disappearance was no accident. She had uncovered something dangerous, something that someone was willing to kill for. The race to find out the truth had never been more urgent. The discovery of the dashcam footage from Dahlgren's car confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Elin Haugen had been caught in something far larger and far more dangerous than anyone had realized. The presence of unidentified figures in the road that night suggested an ambush, and Dahlgren's panicked voice in the recording proved that whatever happened next was unexpected and violent. The forensic team worked tirelessly to enhance the video, hoping to extract more details about the individuals blocking the road. While the heat damage had distorted much of the footage, a single frame showed a glimpse of a figure wearing a heavy coat, a hood pulled tightly over their face. Their stance was rigid, and in their hand, something metallic reflected in the headlights, possibly a weapon. But the biggest revelation came not from the video itself, but from the vehicle's GPS system. Although damaged, technicians managed to recover partial coordinates from the night of Elin's disappearance. The data placed Dahlgren's car on an unmarked gravel road leading deep into the forest, several kilometers beyond where the burned-out vehicle had been found. Investigators immediately dispatched a search team to the location. What they found sent a wave of unease through the unit. A clearing, and in the center of it, a large abandoned warehouse. The structure, long forgotten, had once been used as a supply depot during the Cold War, but had since fallen into disrepair. The rusted metal doors hung slightly ajar, creaking as the wind blew through the overgrown lot. The moment the officers stepped inside, the stench of mildew and damp concrete filled the air. The interior was nearly empty, save for a few discarded crates and remnants of old machinery. But in the far corner of the warehouse, a chilling discovery awaited them. A metal chair, positioned squarely beneath a rusted overhead light fixture, with frayed ropes still attached to its arms and legs. Nearby, forensic teams found bloodstains, old but unmistakably human. Samples were collected, and within hours, lab results confirmed their worst fear. The blood belonged to Elin Haugen. Elin had been here. But for how long? And where was she now? The discovery of the chair suggested she had been restrained, possibly interrogated. But by whom? And what had happened to Dahlgren? The lack of any evidence of his presence in the warehouse left investigators with yet another haunting question. Had he managed to escape, or had he met a worse fate elsewhere? As the investigation continued, another lead emerged. An anonymous tip was sent to the police, a single typed message delivered through an encrypted email server. The sender remained untraceable, but the message was brief and chilling. "You're asking the wrong questions. She was never meant to be found." The email sent a wave of dread through the investigative team. Someone out there knew the truth about what had happened to Elin. Someone who was still watching. Authorities intensified their efforts to track down Jonas Ryberg, the security consultant linked to Nordic Petrochem. His cryptic messages, "It's done. No loose ends," were damning, but with no direct evidence tying him to Elin's abduction, he remained out of reach. However, new information surfaced that suggested Ryberg had left Norway shortly after being questioned by police. Flight records placed him in Belarus, a country notorious for shielding individuals with questionable pasts. Interpol was immediately contacted, but without concrete proof of his involvement, there was little they could do. It was becoming clear. Whoever had orchestrated Elin's disappearance had resources, connections, and the ability to cover their tracks. Despite the mounting obstacles, investigators refused to give up. The discovery of the warehouse had provided critical new evidence, and the case was gaining international attention. But as the days stretched into weeks with no sign of Elin, hope began to dwindle. And then, a new break came in the most unexpected way. A woman, calling herself Anna, contacted a journalist covering Elin's case. She refused to give her real name, but claimed she had information about what really happened the night Elin disappeared. She agreed to meet, but only under strict conditions. No police, no cameras, no recordings. And just like that, the case took another unpredictable turn. Who was Anna? And did she hold the key to uncovering the truth about Elin Haugen's fate? The emergence of the mysterious informant, Anna, set off a whirlwind of speculation within the investigative team. If she truly had information about what had happened to Elin Haugen, she could be their best and possibly last chance at uncovering the truth. But with no way to verify her credibility, meeting her posed a significant risk. The journalist who had received the call, Lars Henriksen, debated whether to comply with Anna's conditions. The idea of going alone, without police protection, was dangerous. But if Anna had reached out, it meant she feared something, or someone, who might be monitoring her every move. After careful planning, Henriksen agreed to meet Anna in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Oslo, away from any prying eyes. He arrived early, scanning the area for anything suspicious. At precisely 8 p.m., a woman in her late 30s entered the cafe. She wore a plain black coat and a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Her eyes darted nervously around the room before locking onto Henriksen. She approached him cautiously, sliding into the seat across from him without a word. "You're the journalist?" she asked in a hushed voice. Henriksen nodded. "I am. Are you Anna?" She hesitated before answering. "That's the name I'm using, yes. But you don't need to know who I really am. I don't have much time." Henriksen leaned in. "What do you know about Elin Haugen?" Anna exhaled sharply. She was never supposed to disappear the way she did. Nordic Petrochem wanted her silenced, but something went wrong. Dahlgren was supposed to extract her safely, but someone got to them first. Henriksen's heart pounded. Who? Who got to them? Anna shook her head. "I don't know exactly, but I know that Jonas Ryberg was involved. He was assigned to handle any loose ends tied to the company's illegal activities. Elin wasn't the first person to get too close, but she was the first one to fight back." Henriksen's mind raced. "Do you have proof? Anything that can expose them?" Anna reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive. "Everything you need is on here. Documents, emails, transaction records. Nordic Petrochem has been paying millions to keep their operations secret. And Ryberg? He's not working alone." Henriksen swallowed hard. "Who else is involved?" Anna glanced around, her expression tense. "I don't know all the names, but I know that some of them are in the government. The police. They have people everywhere." A heavy silence hung between them. Henriksen felt the weight of what he had just been given. If what Anna said was true, exposing Nordic Petrochem wouldn't just be dangerous, it would be life-threatening. Before he could ask more questions, Anna suddenly tensed. Her gaze flicked toward the window. "I have to go," she whispered urgently. "They're watching." Henriksen turned just in time to see a black SUV parked across the street. Two men in suits stood beside it, watching the cafe intently. Anna grabbed Henriksen's hand and squeezed it tightly. "Get this information out, but be careful. They won't let this go easily." Without another word, she slipped out the back exit, disappearing into the night. Henriksen sat frozen, the USB drive clutched in his hands. He had come looking for answers. What he had found was something far more dangerous. And now he was in the crosshairs too. Lars Henriksen sat in his apartment, staring at the small USB drive resting on his desk. The weight of Anna's warning echoed in his mind. They won't let this go easily. His instinct told him he was in grave danger. Exposing Nordic Petrochem and its deep-rooted corruption meant crossing powerful people. People who had already proven they were willing to make others disappear. Determined but cautious, he inserted the USB drive into his encrypted laptop and opened the files. The data inside was staggering. Bank transfers, internal emails, classified reports, all detailing the lengths Nordic Petrochem had gone to in order to cover up illegal dumping, bribing officials, and silencing anyone who got too close to the truth. But there was more. A folder labeled Operatives contained dossiers on individuals the company had monitored or eliminated. Elin Haugen's name was on the list. A chill ran down Henriksen's spine as he opened the file. Surveillance reports, intercepted emails, phone transcripts. Nordic Petrochem had been watching Elin for months before she disappeared. One email stood out among the rest, sent just days before she vanished. Containment protocol activated. Ensure the subject does not reach publication. Engage secondary assets if necessary. Henriksen's hands trembled. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was a sanctioned operation, a systematic effort to eliminate threats to the company's existence. And Elin had been their next target. Then he found something even more damning. A message exchange between Jonas Ryberg and an unknown contact. "Ryberg, the journalist knows too much. We need to neutralize the situation. Unknown contact. Handle it. No traces." Henriksen's pulse quickened. They weren't just watching Elin. They were watching him. A sudden noise outside made him snap his laptop shut. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Slow, measured, deliberate. Someone was outside his door. Henriksen grabbed his phone and quickly messaged his editor. If anything happens to me, publish everything on the drive. Don't wait. Then silence. For a moment, he thought whoever was out there had moved on. But then a soft click. His front door handle turned ever so slightly. Henriksen's heart pounded in his chest. They had found him. Thinking fast, he grabbed the USB drive and shoved it into his pocket. There was only one way out, the fire escape. Just as the door handle twisted fully, he flung open his window and climbed onto the iron grate outside. The moment his feet hit the metal platform, the door burst open behind him. Heavy footsteps stormed into his apartment. Henriksen didn't wait to see who had come for him. He bolted down the fire escape, jumping 2 steps at a time. Below, the city lights flickered as he reached the alleyway, his breath ragged. He had to disappear before they made him disappear. He sprinted into the night, the USB drive still clutched in his hand. He had everything he needed to expose the truth. The only question was, would he live long enough to do it? Lars Henriksen ran through the dimly lit alleyways of Oslo, his pulse pounding in his ears. He didn't know how long he had before they caught up with him. The USB drive in his pocket felt like it was burning a hole through his jacket. It was his only leverage, but also the very thing that had made him a target. He needed a safe place to regroup. His apartment was compromised, and he couldn't go to any of his usual contacts without putting them in danger. He pulled out his phone, checking for any messages from his editor. No response. A sick feeling settled in his stomach. Had they already gotten to him? Henriksen ducked into a 24-hour convenience store, keeping his head low as he grabbed a prepaid burner phone from a display near the register. He paid in cash, then slipped into a nearby alley to power it on. He dialed his editor's number. 1 ring. 2. Then finally a voice. Lars. Relief washed over him. Are you safe? He asked urgently. His editor hesitated. I think so, but I've been getting strange calls all night. Blocked numbers. No messages. Henriksen clenched his jaw. They were closing in. Listen to me, he said. You need to get out of the office. Now. Do you have a copy of the files? Yes, but I haven't published them yet. Henriksen cursed under his breath. You need to do it. Tonight. We don't have time. Before his editor could respond, Henriksen heard it. Footsteps approaching fast. He spun around, pressing himself against the alley wall. A dark figure stepped into view, scanning the area. One of them. Henriksen ended the call, silencing the burner phone. He took slow, measured breaths, trying to steady his nerves. He had to think fast. The figure moved closer, pausing just feet away. Then, without warning, Henriksen lunged, shoving the man backward. The agent stumbled, reaching for something in his jacket, but Henriksen didn't wait to find out what it was. He bolted down the alley, dodging overturned trash bins and discarded crates. The sound of a gunshot cracked the night air. Henriksen felt the rush of adrenaline surge through him. He turned a sharp corner, his mind racing. He needed to disappear. Now, up ahead, a tram screeched to a stop. Without thinking, he sprinted toward it, slipping through the closing doors just in time. The agent reached the platform seconds too late, slamming his fist against the glass as the tram pulled away. Henriksen exhaled shakily, sinking into a seat. His hands trembled as he pulled the USB drive from his pocket, gripping it tightly. He was still alive. But for how much longer? One thing was clear. The truth had to come out before it was too late. Lars Henriksen gripped the USB drive in his trembling hands as the tram carried him through the quiet streets of Oslo. The city lights flickered outside, distorted by the condensation on the tram's windows. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with the weight of what had just happened. He had narrowly escaped, but he knew it was only a matter of time before they found him again. He needed a plan. Fast. Pulling the burner phone from his pocket, he dialed a number he had memorized long ago, but never thought he would have to use. The call rang twice before a voice answered. Who is this? Henriksen took a shaky breath. I need a secure place to work. Somewhere off-grid. A pause. Then, do you still have what you were working on? Henriksen's grip on the USB tightened. Yes. Another pause. Meet me at the old ferry terminal in 30 minutes. Come alone. The line went dead. Henriksen exhaled. He had no choice but to trust this contact, an ex-intelligence analyst turned whistleblower who had gone underground years ago. If anyone knew how to stay off the radar, it was them. The tram slowed, and Henriksen slipped out into the night, keeping his head low as he navigated the darkened streets. Every shadow felt like a threat. He made his way toward the waterfront, the distant sound of water lapping against the docks the only thing breaking the eerie silence. At the ferry terminal, a single dim light flickered above the abandoned ticket booth. Henriksen scanned the area. Empty. He moved cautiously, stepping onto the old wooden planks of the pier. Then a voice from the darkness. "Over here." Henriksen turned sharply, his breath hitching. A hooded figure emerged from the shadows, their face partially obscured. He recognized them instantly, Carrie Jensen, a former intelligence officer who had vanished from public records 5 years ago after leaking classified government surveillance documents. Carrie studied him for a long moment before nodding toward a small, nondescript boat moored at the dock. "Get in." Henriksen hesitated. "Where are we going?" Carrie's eyes were unreadable. "Somewhere safe, where they won't find you." Henriksen didn't have time to argue. He stepped onto the boat, and within seconds, they were gliding silently across the water, the city lights fading behind them. The cold air stung his face, but for the first time in hours, he felt like he might have a chance. He just had to survive long enough to expose the truth. The boat cut through the cold, dark waters, the hum of the motor barely audible over the rhythmic waves. Henriksen sat stiffly, his hands clutching the USB drive like a lifeline. Carrie Jensen stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the horizon, scanning for any sign of pursuit. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Henriksen knew better than to ask too many questions. Carrie was someone who operated on her own terms, and if she was helping him, it meant she believed his information was worth the risk. Finally, she broke the silence. "What exactly is on that drive?" Henriksen exhaled, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Everything. Transaction records, emails, internal reports. Nordic Petrochem has been covering up illegal dumping and bribing officials to keep it quiet. And Ryberg, he's orchestrated disappearances before. Elin Haugen was just the latest." Carrie nodded slowly. "And they know you have it?" Henriksen let out a bitter laugh. "They tried to break into my apartment, chased me through the streets. If they catch me, I won't make it out alive." Carrie's expression hardened. "Then we make sure they don't catch you." The boat veered toward a remote stretch of coastline, a dense forest rising behind the shoreline. A single, weather-worn cabin stood near the tree-line, its windows dark. As the boat neared the dock, Henriksen noticed a single vehicle parked nearby, an old, nondescript SUV, one that could blend in anywhere. Carrie cut the engine and motioned for him to follow. "We'll be safe here for a while. No one knows about this place." Henriksen stepped onto the dock, his nerves still on edge. "And then what?" Carrie turned to him, her voice steady. "Then we expose them." Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and sea salt. Carrie lit a small oil lamp, casting flickering shadows across the walls. She pulled out a secure laptop from a locked metal case and set it on the rickety wooden table. "Let's see what we're dealing with," she said, gesturing for Henriksen to insert the USB drive. He hesitated for a brief moment before plugging it in. The screen illuminated with folders upon folders of encrypted files. Carrie worked quickly, bypassing security barriers with practiced ease. Within minutes, they were staring at a series of incriminating documents. Bank statements linking Nordic Petrochem to offshore accounts. Signed orders authorizing intimidation tactics against journalists and activists. A confidential memo detailing containment measures for high-risk individuals, including Elin Haugen and Anton Dahlgren. Henriksen's stomach churned as he read. "This is bigger than I thought." Carrie's expression was grim. "This isn't just corporate corruption. This is state-backed." The weight of her words sank in. If government officials were complicit, they weren't just going up against a company. They were up against a system designed to protect itself at any cost. Carrie leaned forward. "We need to get this out. Fast. We can't trust the police, and mainstream media will bury it if they're pressured." Henriksen nodded. "Then we find someone who can't be silenced." As he spoke, the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside made them both freeze. Someone had found them. Carrie extinguished the lamp in an instant, plunging the room into darkness. Henriksen's pulse pounded in his ears. He reached for the laptop, securing the USB drive. A car door slammed shut outside. Footsteps approached the cabin. Carrie moved to the window, peering through the slats. Her voice was a whisper laced with tension. "We're out of time." The sound of approaching footsteps sent a bolt of adrenaline through Henriksen's veins. The dimly lit cabin, once a refuge, now felt like a trap. Carrie remained at the window, her posture tense, eyes locked on the figures emerging from the car outside. "How many?" Henriksen whispered. Carrie's jaw tightened. "Two. Armed." Henriksen clenched his fists. "Are they here to kill us?" Carrie didn't answer. Instead, she reached under the table, retrieving a compact pistol from a hidden compartment. She checked the magazine, then handed it to Henriksen. "Only if we let them." The knock on the door was firm, deliberate. "We know you're in there. Open up, let's talk." Henriksen exchanged a glance with Carrie. That voice, calm, almost disinterested, was eerily familiar. He racked his brain, trying to place it. Then it hit him. Jonas Ryberg. Carrie's grip on her own weapon tightened. "We need to move." Henriksen took a breath, feeling the weight of the gun in his hands. He had never been in a situation like this before, but fear was a powerful motivator. He nodded. Carrie led the way, moving swiftly and silently toward the back of the cabin. Outside, the voice spoke again. "Lars Henriksen, you've been making quite a mess. Let's not turn this into something ugly." Henriksen bit back a curse. They were stalling, likely positioning themselves to cut off any escape routes. He followed Carrie as she pushed open a back window, slipping into the cold night. The air was thick with tension, the only sound the rustling of leaves as they crept toward the tree line. Then a gunshot. The cabin window exploded behind them, glass shards slicing through the air. Henriksen ducked instinctively as Carrie grabbed his arm, yanking him forward. "Move!" They sprinted into the forest, weaving between trees, breath visible in the frigid air. Behind them, voices shouted, boots crunching against dirt. More gunfire rang out, bullets striking bark and ricocheting into the darkness. Carrie led Henriksen deeper into the woods, moving with the precision of someone who had done this before. "We have to split up," she panted. "They'll expect us to stay together." Henriksen hesitated, the weight of the USB drive in his pocket suddenly heavier. "And if they catch me?" Carrie looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "Then you run. You run until you can't anymore. Get to Oslo. Get to someone you trust. Get the truth out." Henriksen swallowed hard. He didn't want to do this alone, but he knew she was right. A burst of gunfire forced their decision. They bolted in opposite directions, vanishing into the night. The forest swallowed them whole, the darkness their only shield. As Henriksen ran, he fought the panic threatening to consume him. He had no plan, no backup, and no idea if he would live to see the morning. But he had the evidence, and that meant there was still hope. Henriksen ran deeper into the forest, the cold air burning his lungs with every frantic breath. The shouts behind him were growing fainter, but he knew better than to slow down. The USB drive in his pocket felt heavier with every step, his only weapon, his only chance to expose the truth. The forest was vast and unforgiving, the moonlight barely filtering through the dense canopy. Every snapped twig, every rustling branch sent waves of paranoia through him. He needed to get out of here. Fast. Up ahead, a faint glow caught his attention. A cabin? No, headlights. A road. Summoning the last reserves of his strength, Henriksen pushed forward, emerging onto a desolate highway. A single truck was approaching, its engine a low hum in the night. He stumbled onto the road, waving frantically. The truck screeched to a halt. The driver, an older man with a grizzled beard, leaned out the window. "What the hell?" "Please," Henriksen gasped. "I need a ride. It's life or death." The driver studied him for a long moment, eyes flicking toward the tree line. Then, without another word, he reached over and threw open the passenger door. "Get in." Henriksen scrambled inside, slamming the door just as headlights appeared in the distance. Pursuers. "Go! Now!" he urged. The driver didn't need to be told twice. The truck roared to life, tires kicking up gravel as they sped away. Henriksen glanced back, heart hammering. The pursuers had reached the road, but they were too late. "For now. Mind telling me what kind of trouble you're in?" the driver asked, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Henriksen exhaled sharply. "The kind that doesn't stop until you're dead." The driver grunted. "Then let's make sure they don't catch you." The next few hours passed in tense silence. Henriksen kept checking the road behind them, half expecting to see headlights gaining on them. But they never came. By the time they reached the outskirts of Oslo, Henriksen's exhaustion was catching up to him. He directed the driver to an address, a safe house Carrie had arranged before they had parted ways. As the truck rolled to a stop, Henriksen turned to the driver. "Thank you. You just saved my life." The older man shrugged. "Whatever you're running from, kid, don't let it catch you." Henriksen climbed out, watching as the truck rumbled away into the night. Inside the safe house, he wasted no time. He booted up an old laptop and inserted the USB drive. The files, the evidence, it was all there. He took a deep breath and began typing. He sent everything to multiple news outlets, independent journalists, international watchdogs. Then he sat back and waited, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe. Hours later, the first headlines broke. Whistleblower exposes corporate corruption and political collusion in Nordic petrochem scandal. The truth was out, and there was no turning back.